Welcome to Inclusion Includes You. My name is Miik Wells. My work is inner equity. Inner equity is my orientation, process, and practice of presence, bringing all of the elements of social justice and equity and equality and sharing resources from the outside into the inside and making it personal. We'll start with defining what inclusion is for yourself, then bring it a little bit closer, what do you want to apply inclusion to, and then making it a little bit more personal, how does inclusion work in your own life, and then connecting the dots of inclusion of how it works in your life, what you're thinking about on the outside, and how those things connect. So, with that, let me go ahead and introduce myself. I'm a Black Indigenous man. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm a father, a son, a brother, a sibling, an uncle, an unk. If you don't know what that is, go ahead and Google that. I am a facilitator. I come from challenge course world where I set up obstacles and challenges for individuals and groups to go through so that they can learn more about themselves and the dynamics that happen within themselves individually and as a group in total. I've taken that work that I've done with groups for multiple years and brought it over into the realm of social equity. All right, so how this workshop will work for you. Now, it needs to work for you because, as I said, this is your journey, and inclusion isn't something that happens out there. It's something that we all participate in. So, for it to work for you, I'm going to let you know how this is going to work in this workshop. I'm going to pose questions. What the instructor will do, what the person that's showing the video for you will do, is pause after each one of the questions to give you time to write down your answers. When you're writing down your answers, my invitation to you is to feel into those answers and don't just think them, because we have a tendency to want to write paragraphs of what our answers are going to be, but then that leaves those answers far away from who we are and where we are. So really sink into those questions and find the root of what those answers will be. And that's the next piece, the answers. Writing down your answers, and those answers can show up in any way that you see fit. They might be words for you, they might be doodles and drawings for you, they might be scribbles for you, they might be different colors for you. But whatever the answer that you write down, make sure that it gives you the context and the content that you're looking for when it comes to those questions, because each one of these questions and answers are going to overlap into the other. They all are going to fit and they'll all reflect off of each other. And then there'll be some sections that you'll have time, depending on how much time that you have for this workshop, you might have time to share with another person. Now, in that sharing, you also want to be mindful of time. You might have 4 people and only have 5 minutes to share. So you really want to get more to the root of what it is that you're actually sharing. And you can share however much or however little will serve you. If you write down something you don't want to share that with anybody, you're not going to be made to. It's something for you. So the sharing piece is really, it goes more into what feels good to you, what choices do you want to make around it, and does it include you? So questions, answers, and sharing. The person that's holding this workshop with you is going to determine where the pauses are and where the sharings are, and then go from there. I have invitations for you. A lot of the spaces that we're in, we have agreements, we have standards, and all these things that we feel ourselves obligated to participate in. What I have are invitations. What you're going to invest in this time is what you're going to get out of this time. So I have invitations. Invitations are something that you can choose to follow or not, and you can choose to follow how deeply you want to or not. First invitation, own your learning. If you engage your curiosity, you'll be able to receive more out of it. Wherever you have gaps, wherever you have confusion, check in with whoever is showing this video to you, check in with the people that are around you, engage in your own learning, be responsible for your learning. No one else, even as much resource as I am, and as fantastic of a teacher as I am, I still can't give you what it is that you want to learn. You're responsible for your own learning, so that's my first invitation. Be responsible for it, own your learning. Second, be real with yourself. The answers that you have to the questions that I'm gonna pose to you, there's ways that we can deceive ourselves, fool ourselves into thinking that an answer that we give is the right answer, the correct answer, the pleasing answer. But really, this journey is about you being real with yourself enough to know where you end and the thing that you're participating in begins, so that you can figure out how to navigate that gap in that space. So be real with yourself. The whole fake it till you make it, it's not necessarily gonna work here. I don't personally believe that it's worked this far, but everybody does what they do. Third, ask for support. This culture that we have of individualism, it leaves us with a wilderness of dehumanizing. If you're asking for support, it doesn't mean you're bad. It doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean anything negative about you. It actually means that you can see where you need support, where you might need help, where you might need guidance, and actually going after it, being responsible for your needs, for your wants. So if you're in a place where you know that individually you've taken yourself only so far, and you need a team, you need a partner, you need a group of folks to support you in that, ask for it, go for it. It's necessary in the work that we're doing with inclusion and equity. Next one, use your resources. I've called myself a resource. Whoever is around you is a resource for something, and you are also a resource. You want to make sure that you're checking in with what resource do you have? Do you have the resource of attention enough to invest in listening to the words that are coming at you, to paying attention to what shows up inside of you? You might have people that are around you that have skills that you don't have, and those are resources. If you have a relationship with them, if you have access to that, please use those resources to engage your own learning, to engage your own responsibility, to go along this journey. You're gonna need your supports and you're gonna need your resources, so please use them. The last piece that I have is to participate. I know that for myself, in order to integrate learning, I need to be kinesthetic with it. I need to be experiential and experimental with it. And I've found in the thousands of trainings that I've done and of thousands of workshops and being with people and just even sharing time with folks, the more that we're participating in what it is that we're up to, the more that we know where we are, and the more we can feel the journey of where we're going. It's really crucial to get a lot of the wisdom and the experience and the reflections and the information that we pull apart in what it is that we do if we're fully present for it. How many times have we just put ourselves in a situation, we weren't really there, we weren't actually participating, we were thinking about something else, we were off in some other land, and then when it's over, we don't know what it is that we've gotten. And that crucial part of that is really being present and participating. When I say orientation process and practice of presence, I mean being right exactly where you are at that time so that you can get all of the information. What you're gonna be getting isn't just visual from the video. It's not just audio from what you're hearing of my voice. There's an experience that comes up in you. There's gonna be an experience of whoever else is watching this with you that you're also going to be taking in as you go along this journey if you participate and are present. So those are my invitations for you. I'll line them out for you one more time. Own your learnings, be real with yourself, ask for support, use your resources, and participate. All right, now that we have your invitations and you've chosen what you're gonna do with those invitations, and just a reminder, this is a journey. You can choose all the way through. Every moment is a choice. You can say, I'm all in right now, and then 5 minutes later, like I'm done. And that's up to you. We all have that sovereignty, we all have that choice. So with this next step in our journey, we're gonna go into defining inclusion. Now, I am a vast and deep resource for a lot of things. One of the things that I do in my learning is I'm not here to give you the answers. Because really, when it comes down to especially this work of equity, all of our answers are necessary to bring into the collective so that we can figure out how we define things together and how we move together in these things, what we choose together, what actions we take together, what results that we get together, and what consequences, what burdens that we share together. So, defining inclusion. What my ask of you is, what is your definition? What's your definition of inclusion? And I'm gonna put 3 different areas that you can think about that into. So, what is your definition of inclusion? Now, there's ways that we've been told, there's things that are in the dictionary, there's other ways that folks have explained it to us, but what is the definition that you hold for yourself? And the 3 areas that I want you to look at: in your workplace, in your social circles, and for yourself. So, what does inclusion mean for you in your workplace, socially, and personally? Now, I put workplace first because that's what we're talking about. And that's a lot of where it gets, where that word gets used. We want inclusion, we want diversity, we want to include all different types of identities and abilities. What does inclusion mean for you professionally? Socially, if you have a circle of folks and somebody new comes in, what does inclusion look like there? How do you define it? How do you hold it when it comes to your social circles? And then personally, I understand it can be a little bit more tricky. That's why it's the work that I do. But it's really about when there's something that happens inside of you that may be outside of your norm. What does inclusion mean for you inside? If there's an emotion that you have, if there's a thought that you have, if there's something that you introduce into your system, maybe it's food that's introduced to your system that your system doesn't like. What does inclusion mean personally? So inclusion. One of the tricky things, there's so many tricky things about inclusion, but a lot of the ways that people hold inclusion is bringing something on the outside to the inside. And not only the act of bringing something on the outside to the inside, but changing that thing so that it mirrors what's inside of it. Okay, now that you have definitions for workplace, social, and personal, I want you to look at those answers that you have and check in with yourself. Is your definition about folding the other, the thing that's on the outside, into the inside? Is it about changing what is on the outside so that it fits more on the inside with the structures, with the system, with yourself? Is your definition of inclusion about bringing something in and changing it so it fits? Or is it something slightly different than that? I'm gonna write that question down for you so you can check that out. Is your definition of inclusion about, and I'll put the word folding because it denotes manipulating the thing that's on the outside so that it can fit into what you're bringing it into. So I'll say folding. About folding the other, and one of my favorite things to do is trademark these kind of phrases, so I'll put a little TM over here. The other, TM, into the system, structure, or self. Is your definition of inclusion about folding the other into the system, structure, or self? Now that question, I put that question out there because one of the challenges with inclusion is it doesn't necessarily allow for, at least how people have been holding inclusion up until this point. And people have been kind of veering away from that from that word just for this particular reason, which is the system might be in a way that whatever or whoever that we're bringing into the system might be harmed by it. So if we're talking about folding, if we're talking about manipulating something or someone so that it fits into a system that already exists, we need to pay attention to that, especially when it comes to something as crucial as inclusion, because inclusion includes you. And this you, we'll get into that a little bit more later. So is your definition of inclusion about folding the other into the system, structure, or self? The other question that I have for you, when you're looking at your answers of what inclusion is for workplace, social, and personal, is your definition of inclusion about changing the system, structure, or self? Does adding an extra ingredient into your soup change your soup? Does it change the texture? Does it change the taste? Does it even change what you call it? This is where we're going to be getting into a lot when it comes to inclusion. This is the place that we want to see a little bit more into, dive a little bit more deeper into. So look at your definitions. Is your definition about folding the other into it? Or is it about whatever that you invite, whoever that you invite, shifts and changes it, some way or another? All right, so now that we've gone through and we've kind of looked a little bit more at pulling our definitions of inclusion up and then looking at them a little bit, we're gonna bring inclusion a little bit closer. So a lot of the times we look at words, we hear words, we have definitions for things, and they might be understood cognitively or intellectually, but we don't necessarily track where those things and how those things land on us. So we're gonna bring inclusion a little bit closer. First question that I have for you in bringing it closer. What are your personal thoughts and feelings, about work? Now, when we're looking at work, I'm looking at 3 different sections of work. We're looking at the standards, policies, procedures, things like that. You're looking at the style of work. So what are the efforts that are being put in? Is it more mechanical? Is it more creative? What are the dynamics of the actual style of work? And then what's the culture? How do y'all interact with each other? What's the atmosphere that you're in when it comes to work? So what are your personal thoughts and feelings about work? Standards, style, culture. I'm gonna write that up there for you. You can also look at work, let me go ahead and put that up there for you too, because you can look at work in terms of the work you're doing now or work in general. So whichever one is more accessible for you. Sometimes we want to keep things away from our personal selves because it hits a little bit too close to home, so we want to think in general terms. But sometimes we want to go right into it. It's like, I really dig my job. I really like my work. Or I'm kind of resistant to it, or it really grinds on me and everything like that. So whichever one of these works for you, what are your personal thoughts and feelings about work? Standards, style, and culture. Okay, so continuing on, bringing that inclusion closer to you. You presenced what your thoughts and feelings are about work in those multiple sections. Now looking at your answers and feeling into those answers, because sometimes we write things down and they might not mean what we think that they mean to us. So we really want to go into our experience and feel things out. The next dive deeper into that, where do you feel at odds with or a part of your work or your workplace? Or just work in general, like I said, now or in general. Where do you feel at odds or a part of your work? All right, so where do you feel at odds with or a part of work, your work, or the workplace? 3 different areas to really look at, and really looking at where it is that you don't fit, where it is that you do fit into what work is. And really looking at those 3 sections, looking at standards, looking at style, looking at culture, there's, in each one of those, there's places that we feel a part of and there's parts that we feel at odds with in each one of those. So it splinters out into how deep this goes and where we actually fit into them. The grander question that I like to ask, especially when I'm doing interviews with people, bringing them into a workplace that I'm interviewing for, or if I'm interviewing to be a part of something, I ask some of the people, how much of your humanity is allowed in your workplace? And it tells me a lot, because if there's not a lot, it's not necessarily going to work for me, because I like the dynamicism and the emergence and the creativity of being a full human being. So, what are you at odds with? What are you a part of when it comes to your work? All right, so there's probably a lot going on there. I get it. So this last little piece that you want to look at is really focusing a little bit more on the odds, where you're at odds with, because those are the places that you may not feel included. So we're going to look at the question that I have for you is, what shifts could take place that would include you? What shifts would take place? What shifts could take place in the standards, in the style, and the culture that would be able to include more of you? I want to focus on could, because it's not should, it's not must, it's not will, it's imagining possibility. Because a lot of what inclusion is, a lot of what we want to do with equity and sharing consequence, burden, and resource is about imagining possibilities, bringing all the possibilities together, and then figuring out where they all intersect. So what shifts could take place in work to include more of you? One of the ways that we might sidestep, and I do it myself, one of the ways that we might sidestep some of these bigger terms and some of this deeper work is looking at the word inclusion and thinking, oh, it's others. Oh, it's the other. It's someone who doesn't look like me, sound like me, think like me, move like me, work like me. And that's why I want to bring inclusion closer, because really, no matter what it is that we're looking at, there's an element in us and of us that fits into it as well. That's why this work is all together. What shifts could take place? Ooh, is work. Goodness gracious. Y'all didn't even tell me. But you're following me. So it's like, hey, you might be doing something there. In work to include more of you. I hope you leave that part in. Yeah, it's interesting because, and this is not video worthy, or it might be, I'm not sure. But I think about it a lot when it comes to the ways that work and professionality requires us to show up and to be. We must be perfect. And if you do anything outside of that perfect realm, everything that you've said is dismissed. Like, none of the things that you brought to the table are worth anything because you didn't do it perfectly. And I'm like, yeah, okay. So, first section, we defined inclusion. Then we brought inclusion a little bit closer. Now it's time to make inclusion personal. The parallels that I make that we'll explore a little bit in the connecting dots part are that we have in work, I put forward standards, style, and culture. And so in that, in the exploration of personal, we're going to look at mental, physical, and interactive. Standards, style, culture. Now in each one of these, when we're thinking about making it personal, what I'd like you to do is take some time. Take some time to reflect, really start paying attention to the messages, the experiences, the feelings that come up when you think about each one of these sections in your life, each one of these things that are going on in your life. Take some time to reflect on how you see and hold those things. What comes up for you when you think about your own mind? Do you see yourself as smart? And in the invitations, I said, be real with yourself. How do you truly see and hold and define and feel these different areas? So mentally, do you see yourself as smart? Have you heard from others that you are? Do you see yourself as not so smart? Have you heard from others that? Is your mind usually a ball of confusion, or is it clear? Does it race really fast? Does it take its time? Mentally, what are you holding when it comes to how you think about your own mental state? Physically, what do you think about your own body? I know one of the messages that comes up so much when I'm looking at things or when I'm hearing people is you tell your body what to do. Mind over matter. Wherever the mind can see, then you can make your body do. And that's a way to look at your body. You look at your body as a vehicle, as a tool, not necessarily as something that needs to be tended to as its own sovereign part of you. But how do you hold your body? Do you see it as not looking the right way? Not feeling the right way? Do you pay attention to it when it's telling you that it's hungry? When it's sleepy? When it needs to go to the bathroom? Do you need to go to the bathroom right now? No, I'm just... What are the ways that you see and hold your body, your physical self? And then interactive. Interactive can go a couple of different ways, because we can look at it as what's the communication that happens between mental and physical? What's the interaction that happens there? Is it more frictional and cantankerous? Is it more cooperative and flowing? Does one dominate over the other, and then the other one mutiny when it's time to? The example that I bring up a lot is I don't pay attention to a nagging pain that I have in my leg, and I don't pay attention to it, and I don't pay attention to it, and I don't pay attention to it, and all of a sudden my body's like, okay, you know what? This thing that we're gonna walk by, I'm gonna hit it really hard, and then you won't be able to walk for a week, so you have to pay attention to me. It's a way, it happens a lot with sickness. We don't pay attention to those little things that are going on inside of us, and then all of a sudden we have the flu for 3 weeks. So, what's the interaction that happens between your mental space and your physical space? And then the other way that you can look at interactive, so let me go ahead and draw that one out for you too. Interactive can be within self or with others. So in an interaction with others, what would you say defines your interaction with others? Are you more standoffish? Are you more defensive? Are you more engaging? Do you hesitate? Do you dive all the way in? Are you curious? What's your interaction when it comes to others? Is that interaction with others parallel to the way that it is with self? Or is it different? Are you curious with yourself? Are you diving in? Are you holding space for? Are you more driving and domineering? How do you interact with yourself? How do you interact with others? So take some time to reflect on how you see, feel, and hold those areas. And another way that I have to engage that. If you truly listened to those parts of you, what would they say? If you truly listened to those parts of you, what would they say? Because there's ways that we can define. We can say, oh yeah, this is great. I hold my body in the highest esteem. But then you ask your body and it's like, they tell me what to do all the time and I don't want to do any of it. Or I tell them that we need to be doing this and they dismiss me. So if you paid attention to what these different spaces had to say, what would it say? Truly, be real with yourself. Okay, here we are, connecting the inclusion dots. So, hopefully you have your answers or things situated in a way that you can bring together what your thoughts were about work, what your thoughts and feelings were about work, and what your reflections were about your personal self. And I want you to take a little bit of time to look at those things next to each other and see if there's any mirrors that happen there. One of the ways that I know that I hold myself and that I've witnessed in folks is how we hold ourselves, what we feel about ourselves, what we do inside of ourselves is how we interact out in the world, and what we react to and what we invite and what we exclude. So looking at what you think about work, looking at what you think about yourself, where are your parallels? Where are the parallels of the standards of work to how you hold yourself mentally? What about the culture and your interactions with yourself or with others? And what about the work style and how you hold and see your physical self? Are there any parallels that happen there? Also, you can look into how does this interplay that happened with yourself also interplay here? When you think about the standards and how it affects work styles, is that a similar thing to how you mentally interact with your physical self? So you want to look at also these little parallels here, these lines of connection, all of these things. How does one influence the other? How does one connect to the other? How does one interplay with the other? When you think about inclusion, I had that question earlier, what could shift in work to include you more? We didn't have that question for you individually, but what ways would inclusion look in the workplace that would serve personally? So you have this could of possibility, and we'll look at a maybe for yourself. Can you ask some entity or someone to include you in a way that you won't include yourself? Big question. Can you ask of an entity or of someone else to include you in ways that you do not include yourself? If you are an emotional creature, your emotions are deep and wide, I am, and I do, and I don't want that to be true for me, but I'm begging somebody else to honor my feelings and my emotions, what's most likely to happen? I'm probably going to take out all of my frustrations on the other person as a way to not hold myself responsible for being with my feelings. So, whatever it is that you're seeing how your work could include you, maybe think about that for yourself. And then, of course, in the grander scheme, it's about, okay, now how do we welcome others into this? And what does that look like? Instead of looking at the other in terms of an individual to be brought in, or even aspects of an individual. I mean, even though these will be, what I'm more looking at is work is for a specific thing. Self is life, learning about itself. The other that I want to put into this equation is what gets input into work for there to be a product or an output. And the three things that I want to really focus on: resource, capacity, and possibility. Resource, capacity, possibility. When we look at individuals, when we look at raw materials, when we look at equipment, buildings that we house, we're really keying in on resource, capacity, and possibility. What resource does this thing or this individual have that adds to what it is that we're doing in our workplace? What's the capacity of that thing or that individual to be able to hold to help us do our job better? And then what possibilities does it open up? And those things get input into whatever we have set up in terms of our standards, culture, and style. And what usually happens with those is they get divided up. How much resource goes into standards? How much resource goes into the style? How much resource goes into the culture? Same thing with capacity. Same thing with possibility. And so when looking at inclusion for me, the way that I hold it, is really about shared responsibility, shared burden. We look at the different ways that we have work structure set up. We have hierarchies, we have flat, we have cooperatives, we have all sorts of things. And there's different ways that these three things, and there's so many more, but these three things get divided up. How many workplaces have most of the resource, capacity, and possibility going up into the standards, going up into the upper management, going up into the standards that we have in place and the structures that we have in place that everything else gets filtered through? So if all the resource goes there and only a little bit of resource goes other places, what's being included? What's truly being included in terms of sharing the resource or sharing the consequence or sharing the burden? So looking at resource, capacity, and possibility for workplace, what are the balances, what are the imbalances, and how does that land on you individually? And even thinking about it on the other way. If a person comes to you, if information comes to you, if nourishment comes to you in form of companionship or nourishment or food, how does it get divided? Are you somebody that overthinks and then just burns up all that energy while the body is sitting stagnant and not able to have access to the resource, capacity, and possibility of what's being brought to? Then what is actually being included? How are things set up in a way that when something comes, all of the whole structure gets to partake and use in a way that is more, that's healthier, number one, more sustainable, number two, and allows for thriving to happen in each one of the areas? All right, so a last little piece I want to mention when it comes to connecting the inclusion dots is a little bit of a framing of what it is that the particular entity that you're looking at operates. So if we're looking at work, if we're looking at self, or even if we're looking at any one of the different pieces, if we're looking at the standard, the culture, or the style, if you're looking mentally, physically, or interactively, what is the predominant flavor of the entity that you're looking at? So when I look at this It's not necessarily a couple of axes and you can plot your places. You can use it like that, but really what it's about is just kind of framing how the operation is actually moving. What's really happening? What's the experience going on when it comes to something that gets input, how it gets distributed, and then how that affects the system. So when I'm looking at this particular axis, what I'm looking at is it more logical? Or is it more creative? Yes, there's creativity and logic. Yes, there's logic and creativity. Just kind of looking at that with standards, culture, style. Sometimes when it comes to standards, they are completely, not septic, what's the other word? Sterile, that's the word. Sterile. So it's logic, everything in right angles, everything clean, it must fit into that. And if it doesn't, then it gets punished. There's some standards that are out there that are creative. And when I think about even creative, it's the difference between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. The other axis that I want to look at is mechanical and organic. There are so many different ways that we have been taught and we move through different areas that demand that we're more machine-like. If this happens, then that happens. But so much of who we are, how we live, what is around us is organic. And especially with humans and being sovereign, we have access to choice. We're not we've been taught to be if-then automatons, and we still have access to choice that if this happens, maybe I can choose something different. Maybe something else different can happen. Maybe I can include a whole different possibility by choosing something different. If I have trained myself to, whenever I'm in a class and it goes for 3 hours, I've trained myself not to acknowledge my hunger, not to acknowledge my bladder, not to acknowledge my thirst, not to acknowledge my curiosity. So that's what happens. I go into a 3-hour class, I don't have any of those, I don't pay attention to any of those needs, and then after the 3 hours, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I have to pee really bad, and I didn't really learn anything. Or I can choose from an organic space, this is what's up for me, so I'm gonna presence this possibility. I'm going to pay attention enough to go, okay, I'm going to be responsible for it and go after it, choose it, and bring that possibility in. So there's mechanical and organic, logical and creative. When looking at any one of these areas, standard, culture, style, how do those things land? If you have something, if your system, if your workplace is here, but you feel you more operate from here, what does inclusion look like? How does inclusion happen in this gap? And I'll put a question mark here, because just because we use the word inclusion, just because there's something that's on the outside, doesn't necessarily mean that inclusion is the best thing, or that inclusion can actually happen. Would this system be able to expand itself to be able to include you? And if not, there's a choice that you need to make. Am I going to endure it? Am I going to try to make space for me to be included? Or am I going to choose another culture to be in, another style to be a part of, a whole nother workplace that has a whole different structure that actually more envelops who I am. Inclusion includes you. And if it doesn't, then is it inclusion? As we wrap up, I have a story to share and also something extra for you. So the story, my work has really been about inclusion from the very first time, way back when I was in middle school and started getting excluded for things, or at least started noticing myself getting excluded for things, because I got excluded from things really early on, way back as far as kindergarten and first grade. But when I first started noticing that I was being excluded from things, I was wondering why and how I could be a part. That fast forwards into myself as a ropes course facilitator. As a ropes course facilitator, I bring groups of people to challenges so that they can learn about team dynamics. And really the team dynamics for me has always been, the team dynamic is made up of everybody's individual dynamics. So I'm thinking specifically of this team, the sports team of, I believe it was a basketball team. So there were about 10 people. They were all doing this element that's about 3 feet off the ground, and they have to get everybody through it without anyone touching the ground. And it's wires and poles and ropes and various different ways to traverse these different obstacles. And one of the things that we do is we'll set it up, we have people look at it, we set up the rules, and the rules sometimes have strict, hard things, and sometimes they sound like they're strict and hard, but there's so many workarounds. But it's just about how you take in information. This particular team, they're one of the top teams. They mow through everyone, and they're just one of the best teams. And it showed in how they operated. So this element that I brought them to was kind of at the end of a day of scaffolding some challenges on top of each other. And what I noticed in them is that they're just gung-ho. They get the rules and then they just go. No process time. I give them process time. They don't take it. They just, let's just go and do it. So they do that again with this particular obstacle, and they touch the ground again and again and again and again, and they're starting to get frustrated. And they're like, this is like state, when we lost state last year. And they're just all riled up. And what I noticed, because this is what I'm trained to do, is I noticed the two that haven't said a thing. They haven't said a thing, and they haven't even had an opportunity to step foot on it, because the ones that were gung-ho going about it are the ones that are touching the ground. They're trying to do it all by themselves. They're the stars, they're the dunkers, all that stuff, right? And so I do my thing. I'm just kind of sitting there and watching them, waiting until they get to a really vibrating place where they're about to explode. And so I introduce them to them. I want to bring to y'all that y'all haven't thought once as a team about this. So that's the first thing. And before y'all go and get to do that, I also want to notice that there's a couple of people on your team that haven't said or done anything. And then I stepped back. It's introducing that possibility of maybe the way that you're doing it isn't getting you what you want, and you might want to do something different. So, luckily, I didn't have to come back in, because one of the other kind of intermediate players on the team was like, oh yeah, I was noticing that too. What do y'all have to say about this? They were kind of shy and wanting to put things forward, which says to me that they don't really have a voice on the team. They might be bench players, they might come in a little bit later, or they just do what they're told and they roll with it. But this was an opportunity for them to bring another possibility. They brought the possibility. Once they all processed what it would possibly look like, they were invited to go first. And one of them was invited to go first, and the other one was invited to kind of manage and lead how things were gonna go. And they completely finished the thing in that first try. Because they were open to, I'm gonna introduce another possibility. You have the resources available to you to make this possible, if you would actually take them in and distribute them in the way that's necessary. Remember the other thing where I had the other bringing it into the system? Those others were being brought into the system and having to capitulate to the ones that were just gung-ho and not wanting to process. Opening the space for inclusion, including them into the team because they are a part of the team, gave them a different outcome, different possibility. So that's my story for you. And now the other thing, it's not homework. Homework, I don't like homework. Somebody tells me it's homework, even if it's the most beautiful thing in the world, I'm probably not gonna do it. So the personal journey, the personal adventure that I would like to invite you to take is you have now all this information about inclusion. This inclusion about yourself, this inclusion about your workplace, and I gave you those 3 sections: self, workplace, and then social. Each one of those are areas where you can engage inclusion in your life. So I want to invite a question for you. How are you going to engage inclusion in your choices and actions? This isn't something that's just out there. This isn't something that we just make happen and then all of a sudden it's done. It's continuous choices and continuous actions to shift and change along with what we're being introduced to, what is being introduced to us, and how we're moving. So, how are you going to engage inclusion in your choices and actions going forward? All right, I'm Miik Wells of InterEquity. Thank you so very much for your participation and your engagement in inclusion, and I wish you well in your journey.